What's up, all my worldly lovers? Davey here. What is Carl the Collector? Carl the Collector is an animated educational series on PBS Kids that first aired in late 2024. The series mainly comprises of the main character, Carl, who is on the autism spectrum and has a very big special interest in collecting things, going on adventures and learning new and different ways to solve problems each and every day with his gang of friends. That include his best friend, Sheldon, the hyperactive athletic Forrest, another character on the autism spectrum who is a very talented artist and musician, Lotta, and the twin rabbits, Nico and Arugula. So normally I don't really watch modern day kid shows that often because, well, a good majority of them are complete utter crap, aside from a handful of exceptions, with this being one of them. The main reason that this series speaks to me on such a profound level is because this is, I think, like the first animated show for kids to have a main character on the autism spectrum, which I find just so amazing that I can finally have a TV show with characters that I can relate to on a personal, deep level. Plus, the show's music is really unique, unlike the shows that I've grew up with, since most of them that I've grew up with have music that's more orchestral or other genres like jazz, reggae, etc. This show, on the other hand, sticks to mainly one, R&B, which I find rather unique for this show, which gives this show a rather soothing, warm, and relaxing vibe, which I think is perfect for a show that's meant to target kids on the autism spectrum. So, to celebrate Autism Awareness Month, I am going to be counting down my top 6 favorite Carl the Collector episodes. Why am I doing a top 6 instead of a top 5? Because I like to go one step beyond. So, ladies and gentlemen, here it is. These are my top 6 favorite Carl the Collector episodes. Number 6. The Green Piece. This episode is basically about one of Carl's friends, Dylan, coming over to Carl's house for a game night with a board game that his grandpa got him for his birthday a while ago. But when they try to play the game, all of the pieces that they're supposed to play with to progress across the board go into Carl's vent one by one due to Dylan's own mishaps, and he ends up having multiple crash outs because of it. The main thing that I love about this episode is that it basically teaches that even though deep breathing can work sometimes for emotions like sadness and a few others, but for more sophisticated emotions and advanced emotions like anger and rage, you might need some different solutions instead of just breathing, such as taking a walk, getting a drink of water, etc. I also love that Dylan ends up apologizing to his friends afterwards after his fit, and then they decide to take a little stroll around the park, and Dylan ends up coming up with a solution that they will use the beads as the game pieces instead of the game pieces. Overall, The Green Piece is a very poignant episode with a great lesson for children and adults about managing your intense emotions with different solutions that might fit your needs, and overall just being a really good Carl the Collector episode. Moving on. Number 5. The Meltdown. This episode is about Carl, who really wants to go to an ice cream fair to get a scoop from one of his favorite people in the whole wide world. However, before he can actually go to the festival, he has to go through a long, rigorous, and painful day of a lot of things before that, and his body starts to have second thoughts about actually going to the fair. So eventually, when he gets home, he ends up having a little bit of a crash out, and eventually tells his mother that he doesn't actually want to go to the fair, as he feels like it would be too risky. And as a little compromise, they end up having some ice cream at home instead, and he even gets to have some ice cream with his best friend Sheldon as a little treat. The main thing that I love from this episode is that it teaches the lesson that no matter what, always listen to your body if it's telling you not to do something risky that might hurt you in the long run. You may always think that listening to your body is only useful if you ever have to use the bathroom, but no, it can be for any situation really. Plus, I also love that this episode basically shows some of the negative effects on having an overly busy schedule, as that can also be a contributing factor into you inevitably having a meltdown. Overall, I find The Meltdown to be a very entertaining, well-thought, and poignant episode that I think everyone can take notes on. Moving on. Number 4. A New Friend. This episode is about Carl, who goes to the local convenience store with his dad to get fresh fruit so that they can make pancakes. But during their little shopping spree, Carl ends up meeting a panda with apraxia who uses an AAC device to help him communicate by the name of Paulo, who just so happens to be the son of his mother and father who actually own the convenience store. Both Carl and Paulo end up quickly becoming fast friends over a shared mutual interest for collecting things, as Carl collects tons of stuff and Paulo collects the stickers from produce foods. The main thing I love about this episode is the character of Paulo himself, in that even though he happens to have apraxia and is not able to verbally speak words, that does not define his entire character. He just happens to be someone who wants to have fun and likes collecting things, just like Carl. Plus, one thing that I also want to touch on in this episode is whether or not Paulo is on the autism spectrum, as Carl thinks he might. Personally, I think that's left up to the viewer, but I wouldn't be surprised if he actually is, as he has a lot of autistic traits. Mainly that he doesn't really give direct eye contact, and whenever he's not using his little tablet in order to talk, he ends up stimming by flapping his arms about, which is a trait that many autistic people have, including me. One last thing that I love about this episode is how it touches on inclusion, as the friends that Carl is currently playing with by the water fountain don't really seem to care all that much on whether they actually want to play with Paulo or not, but Carl feels like he should at least give him an invitation if he does want to play with them, since he has empathy over people who are just like him, since back in school he was called the autistic kid, and not a lot of kids really want to play with him other than his main group of friends. That's honestly a really beautiful message. Overall, I find A New Friend to be a really beautiful episode with great representation of other neurological disorders, and how people with those disorders are at the end of the day normies, just like you and me, and I think this is another great episode that everyone can take notes on. Moving on. Number 3. Lotta the Copycat. This episode is the origin story on how Lotta eventually became a part of the friend group of Carl's, first starting off as merely just an introverted artist who dreams of being just like Nico, whom she idolizes for being funny and smart. But every time she literally tries to be like Nico, even going as far as to abandon some of her own personal opinions, Nico starts to grow annoyed, believing that Lotta is being nothing more than a copycat. So later in the evening, when Carl's friend group is by the forest creek, Lotta tags along and explains to the group that the thing that they are currently seeing under the water is actually a crawfish, which is somewhat like a combination between a lobster and a shrimp, to which Nico is impressed by. So it is then that Lotta eventually apologizes to Nico for trying to copy her every bit, saying that she is only doing that because she idolizes her, seeing her as funny and smart, to which Nico quickly forgives her and offers her an apology of her own, and Lotta eventually joins the friend group. So it is then we cut to present day where Lotta is drawing a picture of Nico and Arugula together, where Lotta criticizes herself for not drawing Nico's ears correctly. However, she deflects this, saying that the ears that she drew of her are actually really great. Then Nico and Arugula eventually see Forrest playing jump rope and they decide to join him, inviting Lotta along, to which she reluctantly agrees. If there is one word that could describe this episode perfectly, it would be depressing, but in a good way. And even though this episode's main lesson on being true to yourself and just being yourself has been overdone so many times that the list could fill in a 400-page book by now, I am okay with that, because this episode in particular does it in a unique and fresh way. Mainly in the fact that this episode centers around on Lotta, my favorite character in the show, mainly from the fact that she reminds me a lot of me, aside from the fact that she is female and is a much better artist. So it really breaks my heart to see her trying to mask all of her gifts and opinions to really try to become someone that she isn't just so that she is popular and could make friends. It's really sad. But honestly, that's why I love it. It's a brutally honest and heartfelt take on trying to be your idols or someone you look up to just for the means of making friends because, well, you'll end up making those friends anyway if you just be yourself and if you try not to be someone that you're not. So overall, Lotta the Copycat is a heartfelt and honest look at a character's own inner mortality of insecurities, jealousy, and idolization that perfectly encompasses the lesson of just needing to be yourself and love yourself. I love it the more and more I watch it. Moving on. Number 2. The Fall. This episode centers around Carl, who saw his friend Nico fall down after tripping on a rock from flying a kite. And Carl was so traumatized by what had transpired that he literally malfunctions, and Nico interprets this as Carl being unsympathetic, and so grows angry at him. So later in the evening, he talks to his mother about what had transpired in the park, and she advises Carl to make a little script to help him better prepare to apologize to Nico for what had happened. However, Nico is still angry at Carl for not helping her up after her big fall, and Arugula tries to reason with her, telling her that there was probably more to the story than she knows. So near the end of the episode, Carl eventually apologizes to Nico and explains to her that the fall scared him so much that he didn't know what to do, since he was on the spectrum, and Nico ends up forgiving Carl and offers him an apology of her own. The two reconcile and they end up flying kites together. The end. In many episodes of Carl the Collector, Carl would end up traveling into his mind to collect his thoughts, basically being somewhat of a psychological look at the inner workings of someone on the spectrum, and I think this episode showcases that allegory the best. Mainly from the fact that we get to see 2 moments of Carl traveling into his inner mind, and it showcases how his mind works, from stuff like his mind buffering, only focusing on the dramatic moments, and others. Plus, I also love that we get to see both sides from this whole conflict, in that no one is really truly to blame for this whole debacle. It's something that just happened. I also love that Arugula basically somewhat acts as Nico's conscience, and tries to reason with her and get her to sympathize with Carl a little. Also, I love this one scene of Carl trying to explain the whole thing that just happened to his mother, only for him to go off topic the moment it mentions something he likes. It's a little addition, but it means a lot. To me at least. If there is one thing that I'd nitpick about this episode is that I'm not the biggest fan of them flying kites, mainly because it's an activity that's been so overdone in so many kids shows that the list could fill in a 300-page book by now. But again, it's only a nitpick, so it's really not that big of an issue. And even though this episode may not be perfect, it's still better than Princess Mononoke. Moving on. And my number 1 favorite Carl the Collector episode is A Whole Lotta Lotta.
You should have said earlier.
This episode centers once again around the character of Lotta, who is currently feeling really down after an incident that happened some time ago at school, where an after-school club classmate calls her the headphone girl while she was just minding her own business. So after she opens up to her friends during a little group meeting, Carl offers to help her out by coming up with her own personal collection so that she can show that classmate that there is more to her than meets the eye. And that's it, that's pretty much the basic gist of the episode. As I mentioned before, this episode centers around on Lotta, and I think this episode so far, if this show continues, is where she gets to shine the most. All throughout this episode, I just couldn't take my eyes and ears off of her. I just find her to be the most interesting and most developed character in the entire series, from her interests, to her personality, to everything in between. I also really appreciate the interests that she has, such as music, of course, I am all about music, baking, chess, and of course, art. But if there is one thing that I have to nitpick about this episode, is that in Carl's very own collection that he shows to Lotta, he is shown to be holding what he calls a video game controller. But that is clearly not a video game controller. That is a remote control for something like a toy car or a plane. If they were going to make it a video game controller, they could have at the very least made it into something like, oh, I don't know, an Atari stick or a PS4 controller. I mean, I know this show was probably working with a tight budget, but come on, really? But other than that, this episode is still so special to me, And even though it may not be everyone's choice for their favorite Carl the Collector episode, it is mine. And after all, this is my list. So, in my humble honest opinion, Whole Lotta Lotta is the best Carl the Collector episode ever made. So far. And there you have it, my top 6 favorite Carl the Collector episodes. So what do you think? Did you think there were a few episodes that I missed? Did you think I ranked a few of these episodes too high? Let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, and ring that notification bell so you never miss out on any of my future videos. And that just about does it. Peace to the world and peace out. Bye-bye, and happy Autism Awareness Month.